Hi, everyone. I love the energy in here. Good evening, and welcome to TIFF by Lightbox. My name is Teresa Scandifio. I'm Senior Manager of Adult Learning here, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 4th course of Food on Film. If you're new here, see what we did course. This evening, we welcome internationally renowned sommelier of Le Bernardin, Aldo Sohm, on Sideways. We're very excited. As I classily called it last time, we're ready for our wine boot camp. So some thank yous and some rules. TIFF would like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, major sponsors RBC, L'Oreal Paris, Visa and Audi, and our major public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. We'd also like to thank our Food on Film media partners, Canadian Living, and the Toronto Star for their support of the series. There's a lot going on. A few reminders. If you would like to tweet during the conversation portion of the evening, feel free to do so, but please make sure to put your phones away during the film screening. And we will be able to see you, even though if you're like trying to hide the glowy screen. No photo or video taking is permitted during the event. As you can see, it's being recorded. And we do have professional cameras capturing the event tonight. So during the Q&A period, we ask that you wait for the microphone to be handed to you so that we can record your question and also so that everyone here can hear it. We are always thrilled. Canadian Living is a fantastic partner for this series, and we hope that you all grabbed one of the little cards on your way in for 3 free digital issues of the magazine. And make sure to fill it out and drop it into the vase that our volunteers will be circulating, as Annabelle will raffle off a Canadian Living prize pack to a lucky audience member. So if any of you still have those forms, I remember last time with David Chang, people were freaking out that they hadn't submitted them. And it was worth it because the woman that was really upset actually won. So, not to say you have to freak out to win, but they've also provided recipe cards for everyone here tonight featuring a delicious dish. We have some incredible upcoming Food on Film events. On May 15th, food activist and member of the Order of Canada, Anita Stewart, joins us for a look at the agricultural politics profiled in Food Inc. And on June 19th, Associate Professor of Chemistry at NYU and molecular gastronomy expert Kent Kirschenbaum explores the science behind Adria's brilliant and innovative cuisine, as showcased in the documentary El Bulli, Cooking in Progress. That is going to be fun. And we have another special treat in honor of the film. Chef Jason Bangerter, executive chef of Luma and Canteen Restaurants, is offering a 3-ounce glass of Kenneth Volk Vineyards 2008 Pinot Noir from Santa Barbara County, where Sideways takes place. This is being paired with a recent Canadian Grand Prix cheese winner called Guns Hill Five Brothers from Guns Hill Artisan Cheese in Woodstock, Ontario. This pairing will be served in Luma in the lounge tonight, so we encourage you to stop by and try it out. I think it's $15 for the pairing. So finally, because you're not here to hear all our rules and thank yous, it's my pleasure to introduce the incredible, I say this every time, the lovely and incredible host of our series, Annabelle Waugh. Annabelle is the food director of Canadian Living and has worked in Canada's top test kitchens for more than a decade. She brings her incredible knowledge of food and food culture, as well as a passion and love for film to the series. Please join me in welcoming Annabelle to the stage.
I can't believe we're almost, well, we are halfway done. We're going to be 2/3 of the way done after tonight. It's very sad. So you're in for a treat tonight. Not only are we watching probably the best film made ever about wine, Sideways, but we also have a very special guest tonight, Aldo Sohm. Aldo is the chef sommelier of Le Bernardin in New York, which is the longest rated 4-star restaurant in New York. He oversees a wine collection consisting of 15,000 bottles made up of 900 selections from 12 countries with vintages that date back to 1945. He has received numerous awards, including the World Sommelier Association's highly coveted title, Best Sommelier in the World, Best Sommelier in America, and the James Beard Award for Outstanding Wine Service. Please welcome Aldo Sohm.
Good evening.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your first experience seeing this film?
I came, probably as you hear immediately from my accent, I'm not from America, nor from Canada. I'm from Austria, and actually that was the movie I saw the first in American cinema when I came to America in '04. And the movie was for me sad. There were certain really sad scenes. Actually, certain scenes where it's almost, you feel disgusted, especially when he takes the money from his mother. I mean, you really have to be in that moment. Many black situations, I think, turned down there. But there were certain funny scenes in there too. And oddly enough, what I saw, as a European, you have a tendency to be always a little bit more critical. I saw how basically that movie changed the whole wine drinking in America. Nobody wanted Merlot anymore. Before, everybody loved it. And suddenly, everybody wanted the Pinot Noir. You know, and Pinot Noir is, for me, we just talked about before, Pinot Noir is a variety which is very tricky in the vineyard. It's very tricky in the cellar to produce it. And you really have to have a little drinking experience to understand Pinot Noir. Now, I know there's a little bigger female audience here, but for me, I associate always a Pinot Noir with a diva. She's not self-explanatory. You have to understand her, and you want to understand her. That's what Pinot Noir is. But however, you know, once you have really a great and a top-peaking Pinot Noir, you will never forget one. I drank many Bordeaux. They're all great. You forget them with time, especially when you have peaking times. But once you get my best, or when I had this moment, was a 1980 La Tâche. It was in my really early sommelier stages. And I never forget this wine. It was just like, it's like, yeah, burned in my brain.
Thank you so much. So sit tight, enjoy the film. Please stay till right to the end because we have a prize that we're going to give out. So enjoy your film, enjoy the corn, and I'll see you in a minute. Wow. I saw that movie for the first time in the theater, I guess 9 years ago. So good, and still really good. It really holds up. So you were talking before the film started about how, the sales of Merlot went down and Pinot Noir went up. Do you think the effect that this film had on wine culture was a positive effect or negative, or how do you feel about it?
Oh, this had certainly a huge effect. I mean, I've seen this movie probably right now the 16th or 17th time. The movie is tragic on certain points, but on other things, I just caught myself where there's scenes in there, I still have tears in my eyes because of laughing. It has this kind of lightness, and to be honest, when I look in this room, it's kind of a little bright, but it's full. So wine brings people together. And it had certainly, it still has a huge effect.
So how did you become a sommelier?
You know, I went to tourism high school and finished off when I was 19. And at the time didn't like wine at all. I had more connection to Bacardi Coke. It was a little smoother and rounder and a little sweeter. Beer didn't do it. Beer was too bitter, didn't like it either. Somehow I got infected by, I remember it was 2 Swiss couples. And they were like me today. They were excited at breakfast what they're going to eat and drink for lunch and for dinner. And they asked me, what should we drink? And because they loved eating and drinking. And that's like me too. When I go on vacation, I could care less where we go, but it has to be good food and good wine. The rest is irrelevant. I mean, but it's 30%, 70% is the other one. But they brought me basically, they asked me, and they were a kind of critical point in my career. I was in an age of, I think, 22. They asked me, what should we drink? And then I said, either I could basically, give them a kind of a floppy answer, or I start reading in my afternoon break. And I did. I prepared myself, and then I said, wow, that's actually interesting. And start exploring. Then my father, which none of my family is in the industry, not even close. And he took me on a trip just to buy wine, and then basically my first bottle of wine was actually quite expensive at that time. I mean, for that money I made, it was Tarmaci from Angelo Gaia. From today's perspective, it was very cheap. At the time, it was very expensive.
So, do you have a wine philosophy?
I don't like pretentiousness. I don't. I'm known basically also in New York that I'm humble, and I think wine is not about ego. Wine is about basically sitting down with friends, have a great time, take your cell phone away, take your watch off, and you just have a great time, sit down, eat, drink, and just step out of the daily life. And I think that movie brought it out too. When basically they made the picnic. When they got it together, at the restaurant, what kind of great time they had. And wine is also, we live in a momentum. It's something also where it's a feeling. I notice very often I drink wine very frequently and I know how they taste, but often they have these waves. And it depends also on our mood. We are really moody and it depends, if we had a bad day, the wine doesn't taste as good, then we had a great day. And it makes a difference.
So, do you have a particular, Miles in the movie loves Pinot Noir. Do you have a particular grape that you gravitate towards, or a wine in particular that you?
I get this question very often, or I get another question very often. What is my desert island wine? I'm hopefully so far away from that. Living in New York, I learned one thing. As a European, you have a tendency to basically limit yourself always. Especially in Austria, we have left high mountains and very often right too, and that's very often the way how we think. The world is so great and can produce so many great things. And it's always easy, basically, to say, look, I love only Pinot Noir, but you will experience that you miss out on some things because there's some great Syrahs out there. There's some great Bordeaux. There's some fantastic Chardonnays. It's maybe a little challenging to get some great Cabernet Franc, but they're out there too. But the more you experience and the more you taste, and I taste very often blind because I realize, sommeliers have a tendency to love to taste blind and basically getting their ego completely out when they got the wine. That's very intimidating for people basically who just got started on wine because you feel bad and it's pointless to feel bad. What I love on blind tasting is, of course, it makes you feel good when you get the wine, but that's not the point. The point is basically when I realized that when you taste blind, you're neutral. It doesn't matter if there's a Cabernet Franc in front of you or a Pinot Noir or a Merlot. You're totally neutral and you basically put yourself together with the wine and you taste that. I see that very often. We are in today's life, we're so marketing driven, whether we want it or not. I see it very often when I leave the restaurant and walk down on Times Square, how many basically at 11 o'clock Chanel bags and Rolexes you can buy. And there are crowds of people. And we all know this is not real, those shops are not open at that time. But there are crowds because we want that market thing. But I do that very often with people when I do wine seminars, even with my sommeliers. And I can give you actually a funny story. I bought last year, we pour by the glass, Lanson Black Label. And every champagne house has very often, they have heights and they have lows. Once they're really getting higher market, they lose on quality because they can't keep up with the demand. So they go then down, and Lanson had that too. So I tasted it again, and I said, wow, it's actually really, really good again. And all my sommeliers gave me the hardest time, terrible champagne, blah, 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 blah. So I said, okay, I came to one point and I said, what do you guys want? Do you want grower champagnes, the little ones? Absolutely. I said, under one condition. I line up a tasting, and we taste blind. We let one bartender pour, we taste blind. And they said, fine, okay, cool. So I lined up 6 champagnes, and I said to one bartender, just do me one favor, just to have a reference point, add a 7th glass, and we pour the Lanson in there. And you decide which one. I have to admit, I loved number 1 and number 7, and everybody was going nuts on glass number 2. So I said, okay, since everybody loves that champagne, we probably need that. What is it? The bartender put a big smile on his face, it's Lanson. And I said, you guys are hypocrites. But that actually is the perfect story. We are so marketing driven, we are so focused on something, and we lose completely out of sight. So to answer your question, my favorite wine is when it works with the food. Lately, and I'm a moody drinker. When it's out hot, I don't care for Pinot Noir or Merlot. I like a white wine, something crisp, fresh, refreshing. And you know, it's like when we have crave for food. There's some moments we crave for steak, and it makes no sense. But I think we'd have to listen to our body. We forgot how to listen to our body. Today we have to run with a cardio watch, and we have to measure how many steps we do. It drives me completely nuts because that thing beeps either I'm too slow or I'm too fast, and totally suddenly this thing controls me, not the other way around. And you need to listen to your body. Your body tells you anyway how fast you want to run. You know, if you ate late night some really heavy pork belly, you're not going to run very quickly one way or the other. So your body will tell you.
You have so many wines available at the restaurant. How do you stay on top of a collection that large and stay on top of what's on trend and what's good and also what's still, peaking in your collection? Like how often do you have to taste wines and
every day?
Yeah.
Well, you have to differentiate, otherwise you think I'm a drunkard. Tasting and drinking is something totally different. Drinking is basically, then we sit here and have a great glass of wine and forget the time and forget everything what I said before. Tasting basically is you spit, because otherwise you can't even make it through lunch, because when I start tasting is at 10:30 in the morning, because in the morning we are the sharpest. It makes maybe right now no sense, but I get normally up at 8 o'clock. You have your breakfast, and until basically around 10:30 you get slowly hungry again. And that's when we're the sharpest. And we are rested. We didn't have any trouble at work yet, hopefully. And that's basically when I taste. I taste very often from 10:30 basically to 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, preferably before lunch. So my palate is really clean and sharp, and I travel a lot. I read the newspaper plus every day some blogs, keep myself updated. Yeah.
So you're updated on basically wines from all over the world. There's no regions that you specialize in?
Le Bernardin is a very French-focused restaurant, so of course the emphasis is on French wine. And I'm very, very lucky because I can taste the best wines in the world, young, old, on a very daily basis, and it's a routine. It basically, that restaurant messed me completely up because you get very, very picky on wines, and off and on you drink a regular wine and you basically feel little bit lost. And I see that on my sommeliers when they come in and then suddenly talk, oh, it's only a $200 bottle of wine. I said, you guys are already really screwed up. No, but you have to you lose reality. But it's a lifestyle, what I do. We commit totally to that, and it's a passion. And you're driven by that passion. You see it there too, he loves Pinot and he basically goes. There's no stop for him.
So when he's tasting throughout the film, they really go out of their way to make him seem very pretentious when he's tasting. The way he's talking about wine and, there's a soupçon of this and, a flutter of nutty Edam cheese and this kind of stuff. And when you're listening to him, are you thinking this guy's full of hot air? Or are you thinking, yes, there is a flutter of nutty Edam cheese in that wine?
Part of it is true, but I think 60% is painful to listen to that. Yeah. Because, yes, that drives those wine people. Look, I see it very often. When you read tasting descriptions from critics, very often, what does that mean for strawberry, cedarwood, toasted almonds and stuff like? If we all taste in a room, we experience maybe on one wine. For me, I would say maybe it's strawberry, but if someone of you said it smells like raspberry to me, we all are right, because that's very subjective. When you taste in a group like that together, what's not subjective is alcohol level. Is it high? Is it low? We all experience that. The acid. Okay, that basically are key elements. When I'm in the restaurant, I never talk about fruit flavors because you get caught up in that. And nothing is worse when somebody talks exactly a minute like that with fruit flavors like that. Okay, like he said, when are we drinking? Because you're missing here the point.
So, what do you think are the most important things to consider when you're pairing food with wine?
Uh, and that's one of my specialties, or at least the press believes that. Uh, uh, it's food and wine is a relationship. It's like man and woman, and I don't want to talk myself into trouble here, but what I ultimately look and for is that you marry things together. And it's basically like you bring flavors together and they elevate. So, not somebody is on top of the other and the other way around, because life teaches us it doesn't work that way, or at least not long. But basically they melt together and really lift. And basically get this kind of, once after you exhale, you swallow, you exhale, then you still can basically taste the wine and get the flavors of the food. That's basically those ideal things. Very often when you have, and I have a lot of wine pairings, when I taste outside of it too, is flavors go often just along, but they don't interact. We have that with people too. Here and there we get along with people very well, but we never get really into an argument. Those are boring conversations, right? I mean, not in depth. You don't have a discussion. And that's not a perfect pairing. Or pairing doesn't work at all. Just taste blue cheese with red wine. I know people say very often cheese with red wine, it's perfect. That's actually a big mistake. In my opinion, 70% white wine is better with cheese than actually with red wine. Just taste yourself some Roquefort or some Gorgonzola, taste it with some grape Cabernet or even Pinot Noir, and you will see basically how many wrinkles you get in your face, because you pick up beautifully the ammonia, because that blue cheese that is very acidic and it doesn't interact with the fruit of the wine at all, and tannin not at all. It's getting really sour, really harsh. If you use a little bit white wine with a little bit residual sugar, you soften it out.
And so are there any other things like that kind of rules that you find, not rules, but guidelines? Are there any foods that, for example, that you can't really pair with wine at all?
There's some elements where it's hard. I mean, look, the sky is the limit. I like to push boundaries, and that started, never left since school. My teacher told me once, cheating is allowed. The only thing what is not allowed is getting caught. That's true in that combination here. Look, I mean, if you go textbook, old-fashioned way, at Le Bernardin we don't serve red wine, because red wine goes not with fish. If you go to Italy, you will realize immediately when you travel there, they serve you chicken breast, which is white meat, with a little bit tomato sauce, and they serve you red wine. And you know what? It's fantastic. Now, with fish and red wine, you get that there too, even in the southern part of France. Your playground is getting a little bit narrow. What I find very often are very, very difficult components to work with are tomatoes. Cucumbers are extremely challenging. We all read, of course, artichokes or asparagus are tough, but I find cucumbers even tougher, because they have this very distinct flavor and not necessarily going with wine.
So you're basically the only real way to know if something is going to go with food is to taste it. There's no, I mean, you couldn't say, okay, well, tonight I'm making, squab with this and that, and then just know the type of wine that's going to go with it automatically.
I can do that at home at private.
Yeah.
But at Le Bernardin, I cannot afford that, because I try to avoid coincidences as much as I can. Yeah, people come with expectations, and if that doesn't work out 100%, it's not that good. So, of course, I taste all the time. However, when I notice by myself, the most creative when I am is actually not at work. And that makes maybe no sense in what I'm saying right now. But very often, if I go running or I go hiking, I mean, it's tough in New York, but if I'm outside, then I very often think about food, because I love it so much. And when I get hungry, then even more so. It's basically like torture. But then you start basically interacting, breaking down in your head the flavors. And then very often you think, okay, what could work there? And I had once a dish, a chocolate caramel egg, and I came up with the idea that could actually work with a very bitter beer, a dark beer. But it's not a sweet one at all. And it took off, and I got so much press on that. That basically came on a Sunday morning at running. I tasted it the next day and it really worked.
So you like beer too now? You're not just Bacardi
no.
and Coke.
I'm very, of course, people see me immediately as a wine person. When I come home at night, there's no wine at all.
It's just gin and tonic all the way.
No. I drink a beer. Because when you go wine tasting all day, and especially I just came from a big France trip, when you taste all day and you taste up to 100 wines, it's very exhausting. At the end of the night, your palate basically is fatigue. There's so much acid, so much tannins, and what you want basically is some refreshment. And basically, for me, a fresh, cool Pilsner or a lager is just perfect.
So when you're cooking with wine, is the rule kind of the same? Or would you say that you'd cook with the wine that you're going to drink, or would you? Are there different set of rules when you're cooking with wine, like in coq au vin or something like that?
I'm too moody when it comes to that and too creative. Very often I go in. I never look in a cookbook and say I'm gonna cook that, because that will turn out always different. Because it depends always. I go in the grocery store, or on the markets and see what is fresh there. Because if I see fresh basil and super fresh tomatoes, I buy them. Whether that was in the cookbook or not, because I love it. So I change it up then. With wine, I basically do the same. I go down to the cellar and basically grab whatever I want. I think it's a perfect example here with the 61 Cheval Blanc. It's when you open those wines, we always save that for special occasions. Now, of course, that's a really expensive bottle of wine. And it's indeed, do we really have to always wait for a birthday or whatever occasion? Here and there, when you really open that, you give yourself a treat. And I think that's a great treat, and you just can enjoy it. And don't have to focus about your friends, what they think about this wine, because you can concentrate on that and enjoy it.
So you actually mentioned when we were speaking before the film that the Cheval Blanc is actually a mixture of Cabernet Franc and Merlot, the two grapes that he disses the most in the film.
Yeah, he hated Merlot, there was no doubt about it, and he didn't care about Cabernet Franc either, and Cheval Blanc is basically based on those two varieties. I don't know if that was basically a hidden joke or not well done research. On the other hand, I know from a friend of mine, he read the book, and actually I read the book to about half. I realized the book is a little bit different build up on that. The book is a little bit more elaborate, and certain scenes are different. But they talk about a wine in the book which actually wasn't produced. And I know from a friend, he basically wrote to the producer and I said, yeah, it's funny that you are another guy from Japan actually wrote him that this wine wasn't produced. I said, you were the only people who found that out.
So Maya mentions that the 61 Cheval is peaking. How do you know when a wine is peaking? How do you know that it's not going to get any better than it is?
Well, I taste a lot. And in this case, I drink a lot, because those wines you don't spit anymore. At least I don't, because that's disrespectful. That's basically, you reach the ultimate and you reach an art. And of course, I get very often asked, people say, how is it possible that a bottle of wine costs $10,000 and more? And I said, well, how is it possible that the Klimt, which got sold to New York, costed $140 million?
Yeah, but you don't drink the Klimt. It's not gone after you look at it. That's the most amazing part about wine, is that you drink it and then it's gone.
Well, there are many things like that.
Yeah.
It's an art and it's a rarity. How many 61s are today? There's many 61s in the market, but not all of them are real. Sadly, that's an outcome of the demand. You taste a lot and you know how those wines basically taste. I got last year actually in a tasting with a big collector, and sadly tasted a couple of wines where I know they didn't taste, the real one don't taste like that. So counterfeit lately is sadly in our industry an issue, especially in those really high-end wines.
So you're just constantly cracking open $10,000 bottles of wine to make sure that they
No,
still They're still good.
That's what I mentioned maybe before. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. That's basically my field. You know, you do a lot of research, you read a lot. I'm spoiled. You know, very often people order those wines, and I taste them fairly frequently. And I think one of the real skills you have to have as a sommelier is not only basically to taste good. You have to have a very, very strong memorization and knowledge, because you need to you need to travel the areas. You need to memorize the vintages. You need to remember. It's basically that's your RAM basically, which you have to access like on a computer immediately. How they tasted a year ago or 2 years ago, or when you tasted certain wines, you remember. And you have to archive that, but accessible in your brain.
So what is what
Do it
would
make
you
sense now?
Yeah, it does actually. It makes much more sense. What is would you say is the oldest drinkable wine right now?
That depends
know
what.
of.
That depends what. I tasted last year down to 1820 Madeira. I tasted actually down to 1765. That was the oldest one. I personally find Madeiras is one of the most ageable wines. I mean, the area is in big conflict because when you talk about vintage Madeira, they get released after 22 years, and nobody gets excited. That's already kind of a problem because that's almost one generation or half of a generation which doesn't get money until the wine gets released, and the problem is nobody gets excited. When people get excited on Madeira is after about 100 years, 150. And those wines are unbelievably good. And oddly enough, they're inexpensive for what they are. I mean, in relation to Bordeaux or Burgundies. Those wines are great. If you talk to Bordeaux, depending on what they are, I tasted 1900s, also down to 1800. They were great. Of course, they're going a little bit downhill. It's like, wine is, like she said, is a living. For me, I always compared with human beings because in the young part, a wine is very, very powerful, very often is not really in balance. It's like kids, you know, they run all day until basically they collapse and before they do one stop. And eventually, you know, it grows and you evolve and you use your skill and your strength more wiser. And eventually you get to a point where you peak and then you start getting cranky. And yeah.
So what wines are better suited to aging? Like if somebody wanted to go out to the liquor store and buy, maybe not a brand, but a wine to put in their cellar and keep for years, is there a particular kind that is better suited to that?
Yeah, I mean, sadly it's high-end wine.
Yeah.
But I think, first of all, you need to make sure you have a good cellar. Because very often you have cellars, I see cellars which basically are on, here in Canada you're metric, right? Okay, good. I have always this issue in America to reconvert, in the US. If you have cellars, you know, with 20 degrees Celsius, don't even bother to start storing wine because you should consume that wine quickly because it won't last. I personally find champagne incredibly ageable. Of course, you go on Bordeaux, Burgundy, you can get also some really interesting Californian wine, which age incredibly well. What I think right now is a huge bargain is Riesling from Germany. You never spend a lot of money and you still get them. And they're fairly inexpensive for basically the age. Austrian wine can be also very interesting. And what I noticed, you don't have to go ultimately to high-end wines. You can also go to the mid-level, and they can age also incredibly well.
Is there a region right now that you're excited about that is kind of underrated or perhaps, you know, is kind of trending right now that you're like into?
That's a loaded question. We're in a weird situation right now, I think, in the market. Burgundy basically has, in the last 3 vintages, misses an entire vintage in the volume. The demand is incredibly high. Bordeaux basically is in big time trouble because they've focused entirely on the Asian market. And right now, basically, the Asian market focuses into Burgundy, which brings the whole industry in even more kind of in a crisis. I personally believe Rhône red is incredibly interesting. Maybe not necessarily cheap, but I hope this Parker doesn't get this really heavy in as he used to do. German Riesling will be still there. Right now, you see a development in the sommelier industry about the pushing sherry. I find them interesting. However, I have always issues with alcohol levels because the sherry has between 17 and 19% alcohol. If we have really refined seafood, that might be not always the case. You need rustic food with that, basically to match that up. But of course, they're relatively inexpensive for the age, what they have. I mean, on the other hand, I notice very often that people basically, we all are impatient. And I walked today a little bit through Toronto, and I saw also people, they have a bus here. And do we really want to run 10 years around one bottle and look at it constantly? I mean, I can't keep up with that patience. It's for me very, very hard. Because people are not used to drink it anymore. Right now, our palates are very often much more trained to young, fruit-forward, crisp. And I give you a good story on that. I had last year two couples actually, and the gentleman said they're really Burgundy lovers, and they like something really interesting and good, and something should be really strong. I said, okay, I think I have something. So I gave them an 82 Puligny from Le Fleuve, Pucelle, which is absolute benchmark wine, and they were totally excited. And the wine was in absolute killer condition. They rejected it. Basically, I didn't understand the world anymore. And then I realized I made a mistake. I should have asked deep, because as a sommelier, I have ultimately always one problem. You approach the table, and you have basically a couple seconds to filter what basically is the customer looking for. And it's very hard, you know, people, I give you a good example on that. People say very often, we like something fruity. What they mean very often is like a fruit aromaticness, like a Sauvignon Blanc. But if you give them a fruity style of Riesling, they say, what is wrong? It's just too sweet. See, that's very often confusing. You need to filter that in those couple seconds. And I made a mistake there. I didn't filter strong enough. And I gave them after a much younger white Burgundy, and they were happy. But I realized people are not as trained anymore to taste old wine, because the fruit is not there anymore. The secondary flavors come already, and that's not necessarily on vogue right now.
And so what do you do with that bottle that they reject?
You know, I mean, first I had some stomach cramps. No, because for me personally, it's look, people reject wine off and on, and it's not a problem to me. Look, what's the point of arguing with someone? It's rather making it happy. What I did with that bottle, I tell you the truth, I sold it by the glass at the bar, and a couple of people for $30. A bottle which costed $1,000. So look, I tried to make as much as possible, as many as people happy, and got a great deal and got excited about that, and basically gave them an incentive. And that's the only thing I can do at that moment. And I tried to make the best out of it.
Well, we watched another film earlier in the series called The Trip, and one character is admonishing another one because when he tastes the wine, he's saying, "Oh yeah, it's good," and the other guy says, "They're not asking you if it's good. They're only asking you to taste it to see if it's corked. They don't want to hear your opinion on the wine." Is that true? What you're saying is basically that you do want to hear their opinion on the wine, and you do want to know that they like it, and it's okay to reject a wine just based on not liking it.
I mean, this is always the worst possible situation. Look, for me, I taste every wine before I serve it in the dining room, because can I say it? Yeah. We had it tonight. At dinner, we got a wine, and basically the wine had a cork taint, and
I didn't know.
So
you had to tell me.
I asked, "Do you like the wine?" I said, "You know, it's not that good." I said, "I can tell you why." I said, "Why?" I said, "The wine has a cork taint." I taste very often, you know, and I said, "Look, the way how the wine was described to us was totally different than actually the wine was." That comes in the first place, you know. Then you have already a problem, and I love to hear people. I love working with people. That's one of the reasons why I live in New York. And the more diverse it is, the better I like it. But I think we need to listen what people want. And I basically, by competing, I grew up with criticism. And very often, of course, I mean, if criticism is below the belt, it's bad. But if it's above, you can make something out of it. Is it comfortable? Of course not. But you can, or complain. If we get a complaint at the restaurant, it's bad, no question about it. But the customer gives you an opportunity to react. And I think you should play with that. I mean, the ball is right in front of your feet. You just have to shoot it, whatever it takes.
We have blown through our half an hour, so I'm going to turn it over to the audience. Yeah, I'm going to ask one more question, though. You're probably going to hate this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there a wine that is kind of a safe bet? Say you were going to a dinner party tomorrow night, and you didn't know what they were serving. Is there a wine that you would bring because you know it would automatically kind of go with whatever?
I give you the answer, and this
it doesn't cost $10,000?
No. I wish I could afford that. No, unrelated from where I am, I noticed one thing. Austrian wine enjoys a huge popularity and success story.
You're just saying that because you're Austrian.
I know, but yet that's why I said it's unrelated to that. But when you look through it, in New York, we have 180 different cultures. And I wondered when I came here to the US, why do people know Grüner Veltliner? I don't get it. Because Austria is very tiny. We produce 1% of the world production of wine. 15% we export. So it's basically nothing. And I had customers who are non-wine related telling me about this single vineyard and that single vineyard. And holy mackerel. And then I realized, it's a style of wine which basically goes with every type of cuisine. People associate, of course, in America, as Austrian, you're immediately German. And I said, no. It's a total different culture. German wines are very often off-dry. Austrians are very often, not very often, all the time, dry. It's like our sense of humor. It's also a little bit on the drier side. But it's always a safe bet, and it works always with the cuisine, because you don't know when you have an invitation, what they cook. And it's always easy. Or, for me personally, I'd bring Chablis, but that can be a little dicey.
So I'm going to turn it over to you guys now, but if anyone has a ballot still that they haven't put in, let us know, and they'll come collect it for the prize. But if anyone has a question, please raise your hand, and someone will come with a microphone. And make sure to wait for the microphone. I see some hands, but here we go.
Hi, enjoyed your comments. Thank you for being with us. For those of us that do collect wine and like to cellar them for a while, there's not much to go on in terms of when they are peaking, and apart from there's some reviews from very, very serious super noses, as I call them, Jancy and Robert and so on. And for the average person, would you add a few years to that in terms of the enjoyment, or is that a guideline for people that really know their wine and when the wine is going to be at its absolute peak?
You know what I suggest there, and I tell many people. I think the super noses, they give you a little guideline. The cork is always the weakest point. And because that's basically where oxygen comes in and out. And you see basically bottle variation, you see the filling levels very often. When you have 50-year-old wines, you lose a little bit of filling. Now you always look immediately how high is the filling. Even that can be very tricky. I had some bottles, which had a low fill level, and they were absolutely stellar. That's the beautiful part on wine. The more you know you don't know anything. I face it on a daily basis. I make also wine right now in Austria. And I always, since 3 years, I always thought I knew a little bit about wine. As soon as I got making it, I found out how actually little I knew. And I thought I was able to taste. And then I saw how little I was able to taste. But what I learned, and making my own wine, I see basically it's a huge opportunity because you taste non-stop and you see the developments and the waves what wines have too. Because it makes very often, here and there I taste my own wine and I don't like it. And the week after, it's fantastic. And I see they have waves. What it is, I don't know. I'm always a little bit suspicious when I don't want to believe in the moon and everything, even though it might make sense. But they have waves. But it sounds very esoteric. To answer 100% your question is, I try to buy or recommend, buy a case and try them every year or every second year. And make maybe some mental notes if it's really some special wine. And try to memorize, because that's absolute key. That's where you learn. Then we see basically how this wine basically gets developed. Or look, I tell you the truth. On my first bottle of wine, the Dalmaci, I waited too long. Man, was I pissed off. The wine was terrible. It was really going downhill already, too soft. The fruit was faded. We learn, very often we wait too long.
Any other questions?
And you have to build your own opinion. The super noses are great, but what does it help you if Parker loves that wine or Jancis Robinson loves that wine and you don't like the wine at all? Therefore, we have to listen to ourselves.
Hi there. I'm just curious how people in the wine world position Canadian wine. And I ask because I know somebody from Germany who came here to Canada, and somebody said, oh, well, we have great wines here in Ontario. And he laughed. And I'm just wondering if this kind of view is the view of Canadian wines around the world.
He was from Germany, right?
Yes, he's German. But I have to say he's tried a lot of Canadian wines, and he really enjoys them now. So.
The problem on wine very often is, and especially when you talk to wine people, and especially Europeans, that's very often the biggest problem for them to start out there, unless they have 50-year-old or 100-year-old history, they're not being taken serious. Now, of course, if you take that to Canada, then basically you lose already 70% of the entire wine production, or producers. There can be very interesting wines. I think Canadian wine is very often associated with ice wine. That's what it's seen. And I think it's also the world's largest producer in that category. And I think Jancis Robinson actually wrote not so long ago an article about how she was impressed with Canadian wine. It's a more younger story, without a doubt. But I think, look, there's growth.
We only have time for one more. She got it.
I have no time limit, so.
Mine's a quick question. Where do you stand on fruit wine, apple wine, etc.?
That's a Canadian question, too. You need some food with that, but on its own you can't. It's hard to drink that because you miss a certain complexity, a certain depth. I personally use fruit wine for distilling because you can get different flavors, and I think you get more out of it in that use. To tell you the truth, I pour currently and match actually one quince wine on it. I find them interesting, but what I see. The responses from customers very often they're a little bit thrown off because it's unexpected. For me personally, I don't mind that because you open up immediately a conversation and people get curious. I don't want to go over some safe pairings because I think that's boring for the customer and B for me. I think what is the best if you push limits. So I like to use them off and on, but I find them very often, do you really order a second bottle of that fruit wine again? And that's what very often is on most of the wines, where you have to ask yourself, would I order another bottle? That's very often the problem on those esoteric wines, that you taste them, but you never order them again. And that's basically the main issue on that. Not that I say I taste everything, basically. There's no ego.
Thank you so much. Can we hear a big round of applause for Aldo Sohm?